Welcome everyone to the first ever partnership study group. Um, and our intention here is to explore the work of Riane Eisler and think about how it affects our lives as well as how it can change the world. So we are expecting Riane, and I'm admitting people here as well. Still, there's quite a few people off camera that are actually here as well. So I invite you all to show up on camera if you feel like you can. So I'll introduce myself a little bit, and then I'm gonna pass it off to Laurence after a short time, and he's got some things to share. Hopefully, Rian will pop in here at some point, and we'll probably pass it over to her for a bit, and then we'd like to have plenty of time for just open discussion to hear from you. And if Rian is here, so you may want to ask her some questions or ask Laurence some questions. But I'm Roger Briggs, and my home is the Planet Project organization in Boulder, Colorado, here on planet Earth. And much of our mission is about the work of Riane Eisler, really. And we talk a lot about the great transition that we're in the midst of. And Riane languages this in her own special way that really nails it as far as I'm concerned. It's the transition from the domination paradigm that we've been living in for thousands of years to the partnership paradigm. So that's what we'll be exploring. I think, let me say a couple of housekeeping things about how we're going to work this group, and then I'll get it over to Laurence. So, first of all, we're going to try to meet monthly, and I think a month from now is probably the 28th, I think. But the most important thing is for you to get on the mailing list that we have, and I have about 20 of you on that already that have contacted me, and you could either put your name and email in the chat, because we're going to capture that, or you can email me directly, roger.briggs@planetproject.io. So be sure you get on the list, and that will have the readings and any news changes, anything like that. And hopefully, if you, I'll be monitoring that. So I'm kind of the secretary here that's going to be running communications, and Laurence and I will co-host. Although I'd very much like to see other people taking pieces of this or taking sessions, suggesting. Oh, we have a special guest just about to come here, suggesting readings. And so it's going to be very open-ended, and we're going to generate this ourselves. And I think any second, and there's Rian. Welcome, Rian.
Hi.
All right, well, I was just doing kind of an intro, Rian, and I'm going to pass it over to Laurence, and he's going to have some things to talk about, and I hope maybe share a little bit about what he's doing at the University of Arkansas with Rian's work. It's so great to see some of his students here, and I've gotten to know Laurence, and I think he's really a great teacher. So I hope you appreciate him. Sounds like you do.
The jury's out, the students say.
It's too early to
We'll
tell.
see. We're 2 weeks in. Thanks, Roger. And Rian, it's so great to see you. And the students are just starting one of your books. I'll say more about that. Roger, if you could make me a host, I'd like to share some images if I could.
Yeah, let me.
I'm excited to have so many of my students here because we've had some meetings like this with students from the University of Maine, and they were terrific. I don't know if anyone from the University of Maine's here today, but what a great group of students in the honors program there. So I'm super delighted that we can be represented as well.
And I'm delighted to be with you, all of you.
Oh, Laurence, I think you can just share. So
You think so?
just go ahead. Yep.
Let me give it a try. So you should be able to see my screen here. Is that correct? my no frills Google Slides. I just wanted to show a couple of images, and what I thought we might do is just talk a little bit. And Rian's here, so she can answer the questions better than I can, I guess. But just to talk a little bit for those who are new to these theories and the partnership domination framework, just talk a little bit about what this is, and then maybe Roger, we can pick it up from there and talk a little bit about what all the folks are doing to sort of engage with this framework. First, so the students that are here are part of a program that we're running at the University of Arkansas called the Arkansas Global Changemakers Initiative. And so that is an on-campus and study abroad program that is attempting to address global challenges at the local level and to empower students to be a part of a dialogue between communities in our region, in Arkansas and the surrounding states, that and communities around the world that are facing similar global challenges as they manifest here. And the students that are with us tonight are part of a course on campus called Pathways to Global Social Change. And you can see my colleague on the left, who is another historian, but he's also a farmer in Northwest Arkansas, and he's giving them a lesson on food security and global challenges in the Ozark Mountain region. And then we also take students all over the world. I run a program in Barcelona, Spain, that goes about once a year, and we also have a standing program at our campus at the U of A Rome Center. And so right now, those students that are in the class with us, and we have about 75 or so in the class. We had another 97 in our class last semester, so we're really growing our capacity to sort of bring students into this project. And we are beginning to read Riane Eisler's The Real Wealth of Nations. And they've done the first few chapters, so they can't tell you everything about it, but they can definitely tell you a few things about it. And so I just to kind of kick us off, I wanted to say that if you haven't read The Real Wealth of Nations, this text fits in broadly with a slate of texts, appearing in recent decades that have taken on or challenged very fundamental assumptions about global economic systems and governance structures in our contemporary era. And I've given you a couple of examples here. So I've got Hazel Henderson's Building a Win-Win World, and Hazel Henderson writes about economic systems that disregard environmental standards, work without regard for resource availability, and are inherently unsustainable. And then, of course, I've got Why Nations Fail by the Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson. And this is a more politically focused book that is tackling the challenges of societies that are not inclusive in their hierarchies, that are extractive, that have short-term success but long-term failure. And Riane's book fits in really well with these, and then in some ways goes beyond. So in all of Riane's work, she is very upfront about her background. I wanted to talk a little bit about, see if I can get my slides to advance, a little bit about her. And of course she's here, so she can add as she wishes. But Riane grew up in Austria, and her family did flee from the Nazis after the Anschluss, after the annexation of Austria in 1938, and especially after the Kristallnacht pogrom in November of 1938. And Riane has written movingly about, as a young girl, seeing her parents and her father being arrested by the Nazi Gestapo. They're a Jewish family in Austria. And if you don't know much about Austrian history, one thing to know is that when the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, they envisioned Austria as a test case or a laboratory for engineering the forcible expulsion of Jews from Austria first, and then ultimately from Germany. And as you know, later that devolved into genocide, into the Holocaust. But the pogrom in Kristallnacht is part of a larger pattern of violence and aggression and pressure on Jewish families to forcibly immigrate from the country. And so Riane talks about the Gestapo arresting her father and her mother realizing that one of the agents of the Gestapo was actually a young man who served as a delivery boy to the family business, and her mother confronted the Gestapo agent in a very brave, very bold way, and managed ultimately to secure the release of Riane's father. And ultimately, the family fled Austria and made their way. And the other thing you may not know is that in the late 1930s, many countries were not accepting Jewish refugees. They were intentionally prohibiting the migration of Jewish refugees, which exacerbated many of the problems in fascist Central Europe. And so, but they did manage to land in Havana, Cuba. And while in Havana, Cuba, Riane has a distinct memory of seeing a very famous incident where a passenger liner, the MS St. Louis, which is pictured here in this image, coming into the harbor and with hundreds of Jewish refugees, but at that point being denied entry into Cuba, and then ultimately being turned away, where about 200 or so of those passengers perished in the Holocaust. And as you can imagine, this is a profoundly traumatic experience, and one that stuck with Riane and played a role in generating the questions I think that will lead to some of the theories that she develops. And it's interesting that so many Jewish and German and Polish thinkers and intellectuals who experienced the brutality of the Nazi Third Reich and the violence of the Second World War and the absolute horrors of the Holocaust, that many of them are led into this deep period of questioning about how we explain this incredible, horrific event where civil society effectively turns on its own people and affects unspeakable violence. And so, a number of theorists have come to the situation. Some have emphasized the unique singularity of the Holocaust in history. Others, like Hannah Arendt or Karl Jaspers, have focused on this period as a sort of aberration in civilizational history. And others, like Götz Ali, have talked about sort of a catastrophe of modernity. But Riane has a very different or a very unique take on this. And part of that is coming from not only experiencing the Nazi era and the Holocaust, but then ultimately immigrating to the United States, going to Chicago, eventually going to school in California. And she told me that she was pursuing a very ordinary life, trying to make it into the sorority, everything that college students want to do. And then later, going to law school at a time when women didn't go to law school, but making her way through law school. And then as an attorney, seeing again some of the same, not at the same scale perhaps, but seeing the same types of cruelty, oppression, domination, patriarchy enacted in violence against women, all of these things. And Riane is tying all this together. And Riane, please correct me if I misspeak, but you're thinking about, is this a condition of the civilization that we live in? Is this something that is endemic to human beings, or is there something else going on? And so she becomes a scholar. Effectively driven by these questions, becomes a scholar, did some work in systems theory with the Rand Corporation, And what's interesting about Riane is her incredible capacity to work across disciplines, to pick up on economics and history and sociology. And she ultimately turns her attention not to the present or the recent past, but to the very distant past. I want to slip slides just for a second. I want to take a look at the sort of origins of her first book in the 1980s, The Chalice and the Blade. My students right now aren't reading Chalice and the Blade, but I've had history classes read this book. It's fantastic if you've never read it. I just want to zero in on one portion of it where Rian is asking essentially if we're seeing this type of domination culture, this oppression, this violence, this disregard for nature in our civilization, is that an artifact of civilization? And if it is, then when you see the earliest human communities and civilizations, you should see the same type of behaviors. You should assume that one civilization appears, I don't know, human decency goes out the window or whatever it is. But when you look at a site like this, and this is one of the earliest Neolithic or New Stone Age urban communities. It's one of the first serious urban sites. This is Çatalhöyük in south central Turkey. It is an early agricultural site at a time when human beings are beginning to grow into a turn towards agricultural systems. And if you look at the image, so at the top is the dig site today. It's about it's roughly 10,000 years old, give or take, and um, there's still a little bit of it left. But if you look at the image below, this is an artist's reconstruction of the site. There are things that just immediately jump out at you, and one of those is that there are no defensive walls on this city. Right? There are no palaces in this city. There are no temples in this city, right? So there are and amongst the artifacts that we find in this city, as indicated on the image at the bottom right, there is evidence of worship not just of male deities but also of feminine deities at this site. This is a very unusual place, and we don't see the evidence of the type of militarized, hierarchical, top-down domination societies that we might expect to see. What an interesting use of history to think and to show that possibly the human destiny in civilization or human destiny in community does not have to take the forms that we have seen it take in the modern age. And Rian would hasten to add that even when we look at modern societies, there are societies that are not exhibiting the same level of these characteristics. And she's very frequently in Real Wealth of Nations, my students will see that she talks a lot about Nordic cultures that have more egalitarian systems, more stronger social safety nets, a stronger orientation towards partnership. And so what we're seeing is that these conditions are neither specifically endemic to modernity nor are they endemic to civilization as a whole. They are, in effect, choices that societies make or historical contingencies that can be different in the past. And if they can be different in the past, they can be different in the future. And so, working from this premise, Riane has developed her domination and partnership scale. And in essence, without going into too much detail here, just domination elements that you might see in societies. And by the way, no society or almost no society is going to be clearly on one side of the spectrum or the other. They're going to be drifting in various degrees across the spectrum. But of course, over time, we've seen more shading towards the domination end of the spectrum, which is what is so concerning. But in domination societies or domination cultures, you see things like rigid hierarchies, limited access to shared power, a normalization of violence and oppression to uphold social norms, uh, often gendered discrimination and gendered violence, usually associated with patriarchy. You see the establishment of in groups, you see out groups that are marginalized within communities that are also, this creates a moral context for discrimination and violence against the out group. You see valorization of conflict or the normalization of conflict. And then in a bigger sense, the degradation of nature, like a disregard for environment. And then on the other end of the spectrum are those societies. Chattel-Hoek is an example shading towards a partnership system or a partnership framework, where you see more egalitarianism, you see hierarchies not of domination, but hierarchies of actualization that work for the mutual benefit of the parties involved, that allow people to actualize themselves more effectively. You see cultures that are oriented towards mutual respect. You see an attitude towards the environment, towards nature, of care and stewardship. And then you see a much stronger effort to manage or mitigate conflict. Riane, I hasten to add, is not a utopian thinker. She is not advocating, or she's not suggesting that utopia is a natural outcome from a partnership system, but she is advocating for a shift, a conscious shift to partnership as a way of building a better society, a more equal society, and one that is more secure in its future. Okay, so I just want to, before I jump off this, I want to just conclude by saying that Riane's work as a scholar, and she started with this historical text, I'm sorry, Chalice and the Blade, and she has moved into other fields in the real wealth of nations. She is focused on economics, establishing what she calls a caring economics, which I think we'll talk about in another meeting. And then she's even joined with a colleague to look at these questions in an even deeper sense, on an evolutionary sense, in a book in 2019 called Nurturing Our Humanity, which is arguing that domination characteristics are not inherently embedded within our genetic makeup. They're not destiny for us as a species. So let me just say really quickly, I don't know what, Riane, I don't know why I have a picture of you right here. They can just look at you right on the screen. But and these are, by the way, these are things that we will talk about with our class just to introduce your work. So these are things that our students talk about. But I want to just say a couple of things about why I think Riane's work is different from so many of these other texts that I see that are engaging some of these questions, that are challenging some of these same types of fundamental assumptions we make. As I said, first, it's a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work. I had the fortune of literally just finishing a book, a short book for the Center for Partnership Systems on thinking through partnerism theory in world history, sort of expanding on some of the points that Riane made in her work. My work is intended to be a supplement to the world history classroom in American universities. But other scholars, I hope, will pick up the mantle and take a look at her work really from the lens of their discipline, and then enhance our understanding, economists and sociologists and anthropologists and the like. She has a strong focus on what she calls cultural transformation theory, which is thinking through the types of things it takes to shift the cultural framework in which we engage in our economies, in which we engage in our education system and all that. As you've seen, she's interested in deep pasts, but she is also very interested in deep futures. She is identifying examples of partnership and domination systems in the past and in our contemporary world, but also thinking very deeply about how to shift, how to move the needle, so to speak, towards a more partnership-oriented society for all of us in the future. I admire this theory. I sometimes hear feedback from students that it's a deceptively simple framework that she's provided, and it's not prescriptive. It's not an ideology, right? So it's not suggesting that you have to do a specific set of very prescriptive things to move this needle to change the future. What it does is it advocates for a different set of values, a different set of narratives, a different sense of self as the basis for change without prescribing exactly what types of change we should engage in. And then finally, I like this theory because it creates a really nice framework for everybody to be involved, for everybody to bring their ideas, their innovations. It creates an invitation to transcend some of the fundamental ways that we think about the world, or some of the fundamental frameworks that create limits on how we think about change in the world, and replace those with very flexible and very scalable solutions. And the underpinning this change, this is something we want to sort of get to in the next month maybe, but underpinning this change is not an entire edifice, not a prescriptive system, but a set of foundations, cornerstones. And Riane has identified four central cornerstones that form the basis for the types of change that her theories advocate. And you can see them there: focus on family and childhood, a rethinking of gender relations, a focus on what she calls caring economics, which we should talk about in more depth at some point, and then changing the way we talk about our societies, the way we talk about our relationships with one another, changing narratives, changing language. And this, I know, is something that Roger has been very interested in as well. So with that in mind, I am going to turn my screen off and rejoin you. Riane, do you want to comment on what we've just talked about, or do you?
Well, I am first of all very grateful that you are both doing this. I loved your presentation. I could add many things, of course, but you've covered the basics. And I do want to perhaps add one thing. We have been focusing our interventions on very much on what I call tactics, like putting your finger in the dike, and it doesn't work for the simple reason that it keeps the system going. It does ameliorate some of the suffering, some of the traumas that are constantly caused by domination systems, starting in families, going on with economics, etc. But my focus has been on these four cornerstones as strategies, moving them from domination to partnership. And one of the things that I will be glad to share with you is that we just had a virtual summit attended by over 2,000 people globally on Peace Begins at Home, because this work is very much about whole systems analysis and connecting the dots, which I hope that the education of the future will really teach students, because complex systems, I draw a lot from chaos theory, from nonlinear dynamics, etc. But I'm going to shut up because I have a lot of passion for this. I'm still at it at my age, And but I'm just delighted to see so many of you here, uh, young people, both male and female, um, because we have to, our task is not just deconstruction, but reconstruction. And I see reconstruction as moving towards the partnership side, not to go back to any good old days. And I love that you emphasize that, but to see how to construct a partnership-oriented society in an overpopulated world, in a world where, frankly, the domination system is not evolutionarily adaptive because it threatens to take us to an evolutionary dead end. It does not recognize, when you mentioned in-group versus out-group, it's based on that type of thinking. And our old categories, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, the capitalist, socialist, they keep us at each other, don't they? And this is no way to really approach the problem. It's a question of changing consciousness and then action. And I'm going to stop because I go on and on and on. But the four cornerstones, if you really analyze what's in this period of regression in the United States, for example, you see a tremendous emphasis on all four of the cornerstones. And yes, childhood and gender are very, very socially. It's not, gender isn't just a women's issue, which is insane. But most of our conventional categories ignore nothing less or marginalize nothing less than the majority of humanity, right? Women and children. And that includes boys as well as girls. Anyway, but I would love to share with you um, the summit that we did, because it's about connecting the normalization of abuse and violence in families with war, terrorism, and crime. And we have evidence of that. So I will share that. And Roger, you have that, don't you?
Thank you, Riane. That was a great overview of things. And Laurence, that was just fabulous. I was very fascinated when you were talking about Austria in 1938. And most of you probably don't know that Laurence is a historian, but his specialty is German history and German culture. So you're kind of listening to the real deal there. Someone that really knows.
Well, I couldn't hear you. I have trouble hearing you, my dear.
Okay,
I don't know whether anybody else has that problem.
I'll get closer.
But the Austrian government, no less, the same government of the nation that almost killed me and my parents, uh, just gave me an award, an Iron Cross, first class for contributions to science and art. So there you have it. There is really, the real conflict is between partnership and domination.
So, Rian, we will make that link to the replay material from the Peace Begins at Home Summit available. And so, just for everyone, we'll have this will go out in email, as well as we'll have a folder, a Google Drive folder called Partnership Study Group, with all those kinds of resources. So, the summit was last October, late October. It was just an amazing event, inspired by Riane. And so if you haven't seen some of those replays, take a look at that. I wanted to make one comment, and then I'd really like to get to opening it up here and see if people might want to have specific things to say or ask Riane. But Rian, what you were saying about tactics versus strategy, I think it's so true. And in my organization, we have our theory of change is very similar. We use a little different languaging, but we talk about the level of problem solving that most of the nonprofit world is in, where you focus on malaria in Africa, or educating girls in Africa, or climate change, or these, and you're supposed to be very mission focused. But at this point, there are so many problems that we're really just putting out fires, and we need to be asking, well, why do we have climate change? Why do we need to educate girls in Kenya? And you dig deeper, and the answer is culture. So culture change is much more fundamental, and it's the domination culture that has given rise to almost all of these things. And I'll go just one step further and suggest that underneath culture is something else, which we call consciousness. And so partnerism is really a consciousness. And I've heard Rian talk about partnership consciousness. It's just how you see the world. Your reality is different when you see the interconnectedness of all of us, and that's why we care, and that's why we can work together. So, all right, well, unless Laurence or Rian have anything further comment, let's just open
Just
it up.
quickly, if I may, Roger, just to tie that back to what we're doing at the University of Arkansas. Everything you said is fantastic. I'm co-teaching this course, as I mentioned, with a colleague, and my colleague told just to put a point on what you were saying, he told our students, we're talking about food security, about access to reliable, nutritious food. And we live in a state that one of the
nearby your house, would you be okay if I gave them your phone number? And I said, oh yeah, of course,
Edith, I think
absolutely. 2 minutes later, my cousin called me. I was
What?
actually at my family church. They picked up another one of my relatives. I immediately got on my car and I took
Edith, your mic is unmuted right
my
now.
cousin to form a U.S. citizen, was picked up by ICE and detained for hours. She told them.
Okay, I muted her.
Yeah, sorry. So we live in a state in Arkansas that is a enormous agricultural exporter. I mean, the leading exporter of rice in the United States. We're a leading exporter of poultry, of soy, and yet we got this in the news just a couple of weeks ago. It's not good news. We are the hungriest state in the United States, unfortunately. And my colleague made the point to our students that falling to last place on food security is a choice that we have made as a society. Like we have chosen. So when you're talking about changing consciousness, you're also talking about values. You're talking about what when we grow food, when we build an economy, what is the purpose of that? What is that economy for? Who benefits, right? So when we ask those kinds of questions, those are the kinds of things that we lay as the foundation for everything that we do when we work, when we grow, when we trade, when we do everything. And so changing that foundation, and that's why I think the language of cornerstones is such an effective way to describe the kind of change that Riane is advocating.
And I should add, Laurence, that there are trends in that direction, and that the regression we're seeing is in reaction to movement after movement challenging the same thing, domination. And I can elaborate on that too, but I mean, just think of, and it happened all during a time of disequilibrium as the Industrial Revolution went into really high gear. But now we're in a period of disequilibrium as we shift from industrial to post-industrial. And I use that term purposely because it's not just digital, it's not just AI, it's happening in biology. I mean, it's happening everywhere. really. And it's happening so quickly now that it's almost instantaneous, but it gives us an opportunity to really, but we lack the frame.
Well, how about if you want to ask a question, make a comment, just raise your hand and we'll just take people as they appear.
I'd love to hear from you. So please.
I think an interesting thing to share, if anyone's would like to, is examples of domination or partnership in your real life
Yes,
experience.
I can speak to that, and so can, of course, Roger and Laurence. Uh, but examples of societies that that if you use the conventional categories, okay, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, capitalist, socialist, are very, very different, but who share either the partnership or the domination configuration. I can give you that. And I'll deal with contemporary societies mostly. If you look, for example, at the Taliban or at fundamentalist Iran, they're religious and Eastern, right? But also look at Nazi Germany, the former USSR, and Putin's Russia, which are contemporary, right? And look at the current regression worldwide. Gender, which is ignored, plays a huge role in all of them, doesn't it? Childhood, they're just obsessed. Let's not have children exposed to any ideas that can really undermine domination, control, violence, right? But if you go to the other side, aside from Çatalhöyük and many other societies in our prehistory, in fact, there was just a Chinese, of all places, this story appeared in the what is it? The Fox guy owns it. But anyway, Chinese archaeologists discovered an ancient, prehistoric, matrilineal, matrifocal, more peaceful society. Guess what? I mean, but it comes at us, doesn't it, in such isolated pieces. And we don't see that we're talking about more evidence of, in many world regions, that domination is not inevitable, right? But aside from that, Laurence mentioned the Nordic societies. And, they sometimes call themselves caring societies. And again, gender, because caring has been labeled feminine, hasn't it?
That's right.
But we are not conscious of that. We're told it's just a women's issue. And this is not about shame or blame. And it certainly is not about women against men or men against women. In fact, at the summit, the virtual summit on Peace Begins at Home, we had two representatives of the men's movement, to change, really to understand that these rigid gender stereotypes with nothing in between are essential to domination systems, because how else can you rank the male form over the female form? How else can you rank, quote, what is considered masculine over what is considered feminine? You know, it is very, I think that it's hard for us to see this, and it certainly was hard for me to see it. I mean, but I know transformation is possible, and I also know that partnership is much more pleasurable. And frankly, uh, I had a wonderful partnership with David Loy. You saw his
Hmm.
photo, and he debunked, by the way, one of the, well, in his words, the use of Darwin as an 800-pound gorilla for the domination system, you know, which in the book that Darwin wrote, and I'm being nonlinear here, uh, after he wrote, the book that is Origin of Species, he made a point of saying that he's now writing about human evolution in The Descent of Man, and that culture, yes, culture. I mean, he realized that our normative values, as Laurence said, as Roger has said so many times, uh, so that's why we have to change our normative values. And there are many, many trends in that direction. For example, Ireland, almost overnight, they moved from a rigidly domination-oriented culture to one in which there is a female president, um, where there is, well, I'm trying to change the term for domestic violence to violence in the family, because that wakes people up a little bit more. We're so used to dismissing domestic violence. It's just about women and children, right? Unimportant. So, anyway, there's so many examples. And the most effective example is the changes that we have seen over the last 300 years of one organized social movement after another challenging domination. I mean, think about it. The Enlightenment challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their subjects. The feminist movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over women and children in the, quote, castles, military metaphor of their homes. The first the abolitionist movement, then the civil rights movement, then the Black Lives Matter movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained superiority and therefore domination of a, quote, superior race over a, quote, inferior one, all the way to the environmental movement challenging the so-called divinely ordained, because it's in our scriptures, unfortunately, dominion of man, right, over the earth, over our Mother Earth. Mother Earth. So there are clues, aren't there? Just about everywhere we look. Um, and that's fascinating, isn't it? But I don't want to take up so much time, and I want to hear from you.
Riane, just quickly, I love what you just said, and I just want to underline if you were transcribing this, I want to underline the transcription because one of the things that I hear a lot, of course, we teach a lot of students in our program. We introduce them to your work, and what I don't always hear it. I mean, I hear different things, but one of the things I hear frequently is students who are very well-meaning, who say, "Well, this is very fascinating. This is inspiring, but it'll never work. We can never make this change." And what you just said is, it's not about saying whether we can make this change. Just look 75 years ago and compare those conditions to today or 100 years ago or 300 years, it's not that we can't make that change. Historically, we already have made a great deal of change.
And even though all of us are to some extent traumatized by having to live with the rules of the game, including the economic rules, including the family rules of domination, systems that we inherited. So it speaks well for our species, but as I said, the domination system is not adaptive in our time. And we have to shift to recognizing our interconnection, not just by technologies of transportation and communication, but by technologies of destruction, nuclear bombs, more slowly, climate change. You know, it
We
is
have a hand.
evolutionarily not adaptive. Oh, I see Ava. Good.
Hi, yes. I'm a few chapters into your book and I really enjoyed it thus far, but I do also have a question for you. I was wondering if you believe that there is hope for the US, if the US could reach like some Nordic level of like happiness or partnership sort of situation, because you have emphasized that it's like a systematic approach to get closer to partnership. And it feels like the US has regressed so far in the last even like decade. And so I was wondering if you feel like there's, like hope for us.
Well, the regression actually started as a response, and it started with Reagan already. You know, we have to really go back in our history, but the regression is a response to these movements that I've mentioned. And I think it can't be sustained, the regression is what it really amounts to. But what exactly would you like to know from me?
What I would really like to know is what changes in the system specifically could lead to the US returning to like a pre-Reagan or further state of partnership system, closer to what like the Nordic countries have that you've mentioned.
Okay, well, the Nordic countries are not socialist, first of all. They often call themselves caring societies, and it's not because they're small, because look at all the small countries that orient to domination. It's because they have moved towards partnership. I mean, again, I'll emphasize gender because we have all been socialized, me included, really, to just think, well, you know, the ranking of male and masculine over female and feminine, that's just how it is. And it's not necessary. Look at all the men who are diapering babies and feeding babies, doing women's work, right? And look at all the women who are in leadership positions. The danger there is, of course, you have one foot in the old system and one foot, hopefully, in the new, where we're using it for as a stepping stone. I think that we can, the bioregionists, a lot of movements today really are movements challenging the results of domination, okay? Like the environmental movement. I mean, these are extraction, deforestation is nothing new. What's new is that we have the technologies, industrial technologies, and the overpopulation that has made it impossible. You know, but the system has been a disaster. And that's one of the reasons that I have in this research come up with these four cornerstones, because we know from neuroscience that we are not born with fully formed brains, right? and that much of our development, that this whole issue of nature versus nurture is nonsense. It's nature and nurture. And nurture has culture writ large in it. So we have to change the ideal norms of the culture. And every one of us can do this in our networks, because really all of these movements are sort of fighting each other, like capitalism versus socialism, right versus left, religious versus secular. You can have domination systems or partnership systems in both. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I really think that the more you immerse yourself in this frame, which is what really this work offers, you will examine what's happening from this perspective of the partnership domination social scale. And that's something to share with other people, because we have all been taught, think of the caveman cartoon, right? In one hand, he's got a weapon, a club. With the other hand, he's pulling a woman by the hair. And we think nothing of showing this to children before their brains are fully formed, much less their critical faculties. So it's baked into us. But once you see it, it happens just like that. And you can connect the dots. But I'd really like to know, I mean, you are all future leaders, and I'd like to hear from you. And I really hope that you will just raise your hands and talk. There you go.
Right. Sarah.
Hi, yes. So I was just wondering, obviously, as a woman in our society, like how you sort of get your voice out there to be heard by so many, and not only just to like get your voice out there, but to be listened to and sort of facilitate that change in our society.
Well, the so-called digital revolution is part of a larger technological shift. Uh, and it raises the question, for example, did you know that many jobs in Silicon Valley are disappearing? There are less jobs now that I mean, this should give us pause. But it's also an opportunity, because it's an opportunity for a guaranteed income. But it has to, well, we will talk about economics, because my book really points out the real wealth of nations, that the three life-sustaining sectors are academically not part of what we call economics. The natural economy, the household economy, and the volunteer community economy. And it is related to care, to gender. If you think of Mother Earth, for example, but this is reflected in GDP, isn't it? Look at how a tree is not part of GDP until it's dead. And when it's dead, a log that can be traded, then it's part of GDP, which doesn't make sense, does it? And I see Jackson is shaking his head yes. Right. So go ahead. I'm sorry. So go ahead, May. Am I pronouncing this right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, my name's Emma. I'm reading Wealth of Nation or The Real Wealth of Nations right now. And in the book, I thought it was so fascinating how you pull together all these concepts from like different fields of study, like the environment, the home. And I was just curious to know more about how your theories in the book came to be. Like, how did you choose to research the manifestations of the economy and the environment and the home versus like other areas?
Well, these are huge lacunae, aren't they? I mean, they're just not dots, they're huge areas. And I'm not the first one who has pointed out Hazel. You mentioned her book. Uh, but the difference is that in a monetized age, I believe that we have to find a way of rewarding that work, whether it's done by women, men, or somebody in between. And there's always been people in between. I mean, this domination systems are very much based on denial of reality. I mean, we know there's, COVID-19 denial, there's election result denial, there's denial, and it starts in childhood with the denial that the people who are our caregivers are actually causing us pain, and it's our fault, right? But it's not our parents or our caregivers' fault. They inherited this. And it isn't, as I said, a question of perfection, but it is a question of re-examining, and you are at a point where you really can re-examine what you are taught, both formally and informally. And then your consciousness changes and your actions, starting with communication, because all of these movements are related, but we cannot, as Einstein said, cannot solve our problems with the same thinking, the same consciousness that created them. I can quote another man, because we are so used to men as visible. Gandhi, he said, we must not mistake for normal what is habitual. And I'm in a film about his wife, Kasturba Gandhi. You've never heard of her? I had never heard of her. But she was quite a figure. And they really, in the later years, had a partnership. And it served them both very well.
Yes, hello. I'm not a uni student, but I'm loving this conversation, and I'd love to weave together kind of what I'm seeing here, and um, I'm very curious about the when Professor Hare talked about the response being that's not possible. And I'm curious about the perspective that came from, and how that is maybe it's not possible from a tactics perspective by trying to fix the current systems. And that we are the acknowledgement that we have all been born into and nurtured by a culture of domination. That's what we know. It's part of our flow. But right now we have this invitation to wake up and say, hold on a minute. We know we're in this matrix. We want to use that analogy, but we know that there's something else that's calling us as well. And so I'm curious if we're willing to actually play in what else is possible. And from that perspective, even if it's perceptually, escape the gravitational pull for a while of what we know, we've known and we're so familiar with. And bringing that together with all the movements, like there's many different movements, but there's a whole room full here of people that are interested in this. What if instead of being in silos, we actually came together in partnership and started exploring and discovering that what else is possible, and have that be the start for escaping the gravitational pull. And as Sarah said, having our voices heard and listened to. At least we're going to listen to each other, and it starts there, and then we'll see how that moves out. So I'm just curious about that weaving. So
I think that that's the point of a frame and of seeing our interconnection. Because all of these movements, what's happening in Minneapolis right now, people are waking up to some extent, but it's still us against them. And that is what, of course, maintains the system. And not having a frame that, did you know, for example, that nonviolent resistance has actually proven quite effective in modern times? We were talking about India, for example. I think that you're right that consciousness is what we can all start with. And we can rebuild at the same time that we dismantle, and that the system is being dismantled. It is a very interesting time to be alive, isn't it?
I'd like to build on that just a little bit, and I feel like there's so many calling for this, and this was Buckminster Fuller as well, and in my own view, is like, unless there's an alternative, then people are going to continually default to the existing and the known. But if we create an alternative platform, an alternative playground, and we invite people to engage, then as people migrate, the old will fall away. We don't have to fight it. We don't have to judge it. We don't have to. So let's focus our energy and our passion on creating something new, and be in the wonderability of that and possibilities. And that takes action. That takes, having these wonderful conversations, but then how do we actually live that in our lives, in our communities?
Well, you're right. And at the same time, we must take action to change the four cornerstones, because especially economics, because as long as only accumulation of material goods is rewarded, this, I did an interview for the Good Men's Project on marketing, and we've many of our religions market, but they market an afterlife, so to speak, as a reward. But the question is, what are human needs? What do humans really need? And I know from my own experience that we need caring connection, but not in-group versus out-group caring connection. And that takes some doing, but it can happen. And it happened once before. And Roger, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to return to the question, I think it was Ava asked, basically, is there hope for the United States? And
Wait, I'm having trouble hearing you. I'm sorry.
I'm returning to the question that Ava posed about, is there hope for the United States? And I'd like to take a little bigger perspective on that and back to the idea of transition. And as you said, Rian, transition means that something is ending and something new is beginning, is emerging. And that's exactly where we are right now. Um, as you said, Rian, the domination paradigm is unsustainable. It is driving us towards extinction. So it must end. It will collapse under its own weight or whatever. But there are massive numbers of people around the world working, and I get to see this all the time, every day, working on this new world vision that is very much about partnership. There's different ways of saying it. People are languaging unity and interconnectedness, but I'm just convinced it's going to fuse together, and much of the work we do is to try to do these kinds of connections amongst groups and let people find each other that are seeing this. But it really is happening. So the United States, there's things that are going to have to play out. And right now, I think it's safe to say that the democratic experiment, the American experiment, it's over. We can't stop this guy or this regime with all the things that were designed by the founding fathers. They were all fathers back then. It's failed. And that doesn't mean it's the end of the world by any means. New things will arise. And I think the rest of the world is really rising up. The Nordic countries, of course, are awesome, but the European Union is a fantastic experiment in cooperation. And the rest of the world is banding together as the U.S. collapses and is probably going to save the U.S. So anyway, I think there is hope, and I know young people are very concerned about the world they see ahead, but I think we really just have to focus on building this new world, and partnership is absolutely foundational to that. Just my 2 cents.
Well, it is a very interesting time to be alive. And I think that there are so many young people here, uh, as well as older people. I think that we all want a better future. And I think being anti-Western is a problem. It's a sort of an in-group versus out-group, but the other way around. The West, I mean, all you have to do is read how people were tarred and feathered, for example, in these United States, right? Not so long ago. Okay. There has been change. There has been movement towards the partnership side. And in simple terms, uh, I think that we have to think of human rights as a central standard. And deconstructionism, which I don't know if is it still the vogue, Laurence, in the academy, this whole idea that everything is relative.
Well, I don't know. I think we were, as scholars, we were all skeptical of truth until it began to be attacked in the political sphere, and suddenly we're the defenders of truth again. So I don't know. Maybe deconstruction isn't so in vogue.
Well, deconstructionism doesn't have human rights standards.
Right.
And therefore, I think it is a very regressive ideology because what happens is people go back to the standards that they've been taught, right? And their domination standards that we've all been taught. So, you know, you have to examine what passes for out there as well as re-examine, is it really out there? Or is it just somebody else being on top somehow?
Well, I will say that when we find ourselves in uncertain times, when the future doesn't seem certain and there's anxiety, domination solutions present themselves as viable alternatives, and they look appealing. And what has to happen is you have to be able to provide different alternatives.
Well, and this is what this work is about, and that's why it includes also the past, but it includes also the present, doesn't it? Because there are societies, um, as you said, some, not all indigenous societies. Um, One of my colleagues, Melanie Lynch, um, just visited the Minangkabau in Sumatra, and they call themselves a matriarchy, but they're not. They're a partnership society because our language traps us, doesn't it? I mean, that's why I coined these two terms, hierarchies of domination and hierarchies of actualization, because every society needs parents, needs teachers, right? And if in a more complex society, you need managers, you need leaders. But the question is how power is conceptualized. And if you look at the cover of The Chalice and the Blade, at a bird goddess, and you know, she has breasts like a woman, but she's phallic in form. And she's a bird goddess. And it's all about interconnection, the old consciousness. It's interesting that we have lost that part,
Hmm.
but we can reclaim it in a contemporary form.
I see Suzanne's hand up.
Oh, Suzanne, you want to say something?
Yes, well, first I want to say thank you so much, Riane, for changing my life 20 years ago. I think the first book of yours I read was Tomorrow's Children, and I
Oh,
ended up doing my
really?
thesis on hierarchical versus partnership education. So thank you so much for what you've given us. And sort of in response to what people are saying about, well, you know, how do we make this happen? And can we really make this happen? So since that time, I've been sharing, I've been practicing and demonstrating and modeling partnership relationships to everybody I come in contact with, even the people at the grocery store, and along with nonviolent communication, which is actually, that was where I first heard about you, was through Marshall Rosenberg's work, making sure all my communication is very compassionate and nonviolent. And it's amazing. It's just amazing the impact it has on people, especially that it's so different from domination, from control and everything. So it does make a big difference. And I get a lot of feedback from people about how kind I am, how gentle I am. And I'm just applying these concepts.
Bless you, Suzanne. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And you know, I spent a lot of my life trying to fit in. You know, and Freud, was the vogue, and he talked about adapting, right? And now we have Goldman, and we have positive psychology, right? That's a partnership trend, isn't it? I mean, it's happening even in the academy, And look, Lawrence is in the academy. And and you, Roger, you're connected with the University of Maine. But we have to get people in the academy to do what I know young people really are looking for, connecting the dots, understanding relationships, for goodness sakes. I mean, I introduced this methodology called relational dynamics. And it looks at first what kinds of relations does a particular society support or inhibit. But secondly, and this is where chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics, whole systems analysis comes in. What is the relationship between the various aspects of a system that maintain its character? And this is what the four cornerstones are about. We know from neuroscience and we've known from psychology, as a matter of fact, for a long, long time, that the first years are critical, right? Well, where do those first years happen for most of us? In families, and families don't spring up out of nowhere. They're part of cultures or subcultures. So we're right back to what is the cultural norm, isn't it? And gender, we've talked a lot about. Economics, we must move to a caring economics. Look, both capitalism and socialism came out of the 1700s and 1800s. And we're now in the 21st century post-industrial era. So they'd be outmoded on that count alone. But it goes much deeper because both Smith and Marx, and this is very important, as was the norm in their time, they saw caring for people as to be done for free by a woman in a male-controlled household, right? And they inserted that into their economic map. So when you pick up the real wealth of nations, you'll see the old economic map and the new economic map. And lo and behold, it has nature, the new economic map, it has household, it has volunteer work, which was also associated with the female, because most of the first volunteers were the wives of very affluent men. You know, it's connecting the dots. But I'm so glad you're in Laurence's class, and I love being with you. And I think that, my God, it's almost an hour and a half that we've been together. Well, I'm going to stop talking and let Roger and Laurence take it from here.
I'd like to pose a question to Laurence based on some of the things Riane was talking about. The academy, academia. Laurence, I know you're already starting to incorporate some things into courses, and what do you see as the potential for this, that partnership studies can become a real thing, and or where do you see it fitting into the academy, if you like, and what's your vision? I know you're doing it right now, but where would you like to see it go?
Well, my relationship with Riane started. My colleague introduced me to her, and we did a couple of interviews about some of the work. I had actually never read the work, and I was just fascinated. And then she suggested that we build a minor or minor degree program in partnership systems. But I know that, and these students here will tell you that their schedules are very, very full. These are honor students, by the way. These are some of the best, and you can tell that by the questions and discussion. These are some of the best students that are anywhere, I will say. But they're doing a lot of things. Many of them will do three majors. I wish they wouldn't, but they will, and then they'll go on to great things. And it's hard to squeeze in another program. So we talked about the possibility of embedding discussions, and I just think the material, I mean, Riane's writing is so rich. There's a lot there, and it covers a lot of ground and a lot of themes, and it fits into a lot of different places in a curriculum. And that's kind of what I would like to see. So I teach it with these students in these classes. And then I didn't tell you this, Rian, but I also teach a course on leadership that
Oh, good.
I taught last fall. We want to build a course. We want to build a program at the University of Arkansas. We call it Leadership for the Common Good. This is part of what our identity as a college, our mission, the very first line of the mission statement we're the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences. Our mission is to be a vital public good. And so we want a leadership program that fits. And I asked the students in that class to find a leader that they admire and to talk about how learning about that person would help them grow. And I modeled that for them. I said, well, I'm going to talk about a leader, and I talked about you.
Oh, thank
Yeah, and I just to say this is how I see leadership in action, and I see this inspiring me as a leader, and that sort of thing. And then those students pick up on that, and they encounter your work, and I'm open-minded. Students don't have to. They can form their own opinions about the work, but I think they especially in the context of what we're doing here, where they're trying to think beyond the normal ways we approach global change. I think rethinking their frame is an incredibly important part of that, and I just see your work being indispensable to that enterprise. So I'll leave it there. I know we're running short on time, but that's what I'm thinking, Roger.
Yeah, that does make sense to embed it into courses in that way. So, well, we are just about at time. We will meet again fourth. I think we're saying the last Wednesday of the month. Is that what we said, Laurence?
I think so.
Sometimes that might be the 4th or the 5th, but that would be March 25th.
Or February. Not February. Are we
February,
doing?
right,
Yeah.
right. Close. I was very close. So we'll meet at that time, and be sure we can get in touch with you. I will put my email address in the chat right now, or hopefully you can find it. Just be sure you're on that email list, and we'll be sending out a reading that Laurence and I selected that gets more
Very
into the
short.
cornerstones.
Yeah.
It's not real long. We're trying not to do real long things, but so. And Cheryl, I see a hand up there. Do you want to have the last word? And
No, I don't have anything profound to say. I just wanted to say to Riane that I'm delighted that we're popping up in the same place again with the Planet Project. And I wanted to say how transformative your work and David's work was when we did our conference back in San Luis Obispo. For me, it was eye-opening. And I'm delighted to see the Planet Project picking you up and running with you.
Good. Well, you forgive me, please, Cheryl. I have gone to so many
Of course.
keynotes and got so many conferences that what can I say?
No problem. I understand.
But thank you.
all right, well, thank you, Laurence. Thank you, Riane. Thank you, everyone that came tonight. This has been great, and hope to see you in a month.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Rian.
And thank you both, Laurence and Roger, so very much. And thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.